Hello, good afternoon, and very welcome to this Filmmakers Live, our first Filmmakers Live with directors from Latin America, and our first Filmmakers Live with directors from Latin America in 3 years. That is such a great feeling to have you back as an audience, and also, first of all, to have you back as filmmakers. Like, there was a 2020 edition without any festival, and last year there were, at least we had 3 directors from Latin America here. It was like kind of a miracle to make that possible. But it is now a completely different situation once again. We're missing one colleague, I have to say, who is still on his way from Costa Rica, but now he is from Franz Josef Strauss Airport. He's in the car and he will arrive in some minutes, let's hope, but we've already started. So I'm going to introduce him afterwards. It's Ariel Escalante from Costa Rica. So to start with the lady first, Anita Rocha da Silveira from Brazil, the director of the film Medusa. Then to my right, Joaquín del Paso from Mexico, the director of El Hoyo en la Cerca, the hole in the fence. And Alejandro Loayza, here at your left, from Bolivia, the director of Utama. So it's quite like an image of the whole subcontinent of Latin America. We have one director from North America, one who's coming from Central America, and 2 from the South, one from the Spanish-speaking and the other one from the Portuguese-speaking. I'm so happy that these things can happen once again. And we came here together to talk about a completely uncommon and freaky subject for a panel. We talk about tradition, because normally everything, these kind of panels are about the new things, about the avant-garde, the artistic avant-garde, the new currents, the new filmmaking we're doing on Thursday. Hope you can come too, on a new generation of women in Latin American cinema. And today we're talking about everything that is old. We're talking about the retrograde. We're talking about things that come from the past. And of course, if we do something so uncommon, I really don't remember a panel, a Filmmakers Live on tradition we did at Filmfest Munich. If we do this, there is a reason for this, and this reason is that in 4 extremely different films, in some sense or the other, the subject of tradition is present. And it's polemic and also very ambivalent. When I was talking with Anita like an hour ago before, or 2 hours ago before her screening, she said, but you are aware that talking about tradition in Brazil is something extremely negative.
And the word tradition.
Yeah, the word tradition. Now, not talking about tradition, but the word tradition is something really negative. It's like right-winged, and if you're a left, tradition is something extremely negative. And you say, yeah, I'm totally conscious of that. That's what I found interesting about it, because looking from a European perspective, Latin America has always been the continent of the future. Since Goethe, let's say. And Stefan Zweig, when he emigrated to Brazil, wrote that Brazil is the country of the future, but for him it was the reason to commit suicide, to be honest. So at the same time, Latin America is much more today, especially much more a continent characterized by ancestral tradition, also about agricultural societies, indigenous societies. That is a continent in many aspects much more traditional than the countries of Europe. And there is like an ambivalent and also, let's say, dialectic dynamic that on the one hand, these ancestral traditions are threatened by global capitalism and its side effects, just such as climate change. But also, it is a continent in which, in recent times, pre-modern structures are not threatened, but threaten the development of society, threaten emancipatory movements, threaten social change, and reinforce machist structures, neo-feudal structures, hierarchical structures. So that's why also in Brazil it is such a negatively connoted concept. And that's what we could discuss about. And as a first point, I would like to talk about a field in which this apparition of tradition is very visible, to talk about religion. Because on the one hand, in many indigenous community, but also Afro-American religions like Afro-Cuban, Afro-Brazilian religions, the communities try to oh, we have our guest here. Oh, that is so great. Ariel Escalante, welcome from Costa Rica.
Compromiso, hi. Hello, so nice to see you again, to meet you. I'm sorry my flight was delayed, but it's so great to be here.
Yeah, we had a little talk to wait for your presence.
Ah, fantastic.
And we just pointed out that the subject of this panel will be tradition, which is something quite uncommon because normally with filmmakers you talk about new currents and avant-garde and not the old things. And one point in which one field in which tradition is very present is in religion, because they're indigenous or Afro-Cuban, Afro-Brazilian religions who try to maintain their legacy. On the other hand, we have the old Catholic religion, which is extremely powerful and trying to destroy everything that it comes together with modernity. And at the same time, we now have a new evolving phenomenon of evangelization by evangelical church in the last 20 years that become more powerful in nearly all the countries, but especially in Brazil, which is like the center. And the bizarre thing is that it was initially like a kind of neo-colonial movement from priests from the United States who brought Protestantism to Latin America in order to exert control. And now it has become something extremely autochthonous, which tries to avoid that social progress and social change can happen. This ambivalence is quite visible, extremely visible, in two of the films we are showing here, in Medusa by Anita and En el Hoyo en la Cerca de Joaquín. And we have like the ecumenical vision, let's say, that if religions cooperate with fascism, the confession is not important. It is as destructive one as the other. When we have really, with this diptych of these films, a very striking example what can happen if religions try to or start to be fascist, let's say. And I would like to start with Anita, ladies first, to give us a little bit an idea of the world that you portrayed in your film Medusa, which is the context of a radical evangelic sect, which, like many people, when they hear about the film, think that is from the future, a dystopic thing from the future, but in fact is quite a reality in Brazil today.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. First, when I was talking about Florian, about the word tradition, in Brazil, it's since the military regime is considered a more negative word, and even when you talk in Portuguese about the indigenous tradition, we use a word more like heritage. I was thinking after, because we don't use, because tradition was so associated with the marches for the family and for the values that happened in Brazil in the 60s. That
colonial tradition.
Yeah, that the tradition, the word, changes the meaning a bit. And when we talk about the other types of tradition, we use more a word like heritage. But my film is inspired by a very big neo-Pentecostal group in Brazil. That's because the evangelical churches mainly divide in Pentecostal and Neo-Pentecostal. In the Neo-Pentecostal, the miracle is more strong. They believe in the miracle. Like if you have cancer, you don't need to go to the doctor. You have to pray and give your money to the church, and you have to believe in the miracle. So yeah, and these churches are going bigger and bigger in Brazil, especially since the 70s. And the evangelicals were able to occupy. Brazil was one of the most Catholic countries in the world, and now it's mostly evangelical, because the evangelical community was able to offer a sense of support and offer community to a lot of people. Brazil is a country that very big. People migrate a lot from a small city to a capital. They arrive there alone, and the church offers this support. They offer sewing groups, choir groups, groups for teenagers, group for women. And you arrive at the evangelical church, someone will hug you. You get your phone number, and invite you to your house to have cake and talk about the Bible. So, and in my film, I was firstly inspired by some videos of Army of God. That's this church that I was mostly inspired was putting together. Some images of boys and young men, Army of God, were putting together. And people start to comment, why do a church is putting together an army? That doesn't make any sense. And then and this more conservative vibe was pretty much going bigger and bigger in the Brazilian society in the past few years. And I was struck by some news about a group of girls and young women getting together to beat another girl. And that was the other starting point of the film, because they were beating this girl because they consider the girls promiscuous or girls that don't have good values and things like that. And the other part of my research to construct Medusa was the evangelicals and ultra-right influencers, because they are a lot. When you go to YouTube and Instagram, especially YouTube, you go to a video into the other, and then you stay in this void. You can get really bizarre things in the ultra-right. And in Brazil, there is a lot of ultra-right and evangelical influencers. And some, for example, one of the main characters is inspired by two true YouTubers. One was one that was more upper-class girl with university degree that lives in Brasilia, and her main theme is that she's super pretty, and she fights for the end of feminism. She says feminism movement is the worst thing that happened to the world. So she was doing a lot, and she's like super articulated and doing this type of videos. And the other one was one that had a big beauty channels about makeup and this. And while she's like talk about makeup, she would say very conservative things like, oh, because you have to be submissive to your man, because you have to be beautiful to expect your man home, you have to do that so get married. And so she was a beauty channel with millions and millions of followers, but between one brush and the other, she was saying a lot of things about women being submissive to men.
And in your film, it's even like if you're beaten up by your husband and you don't want your the friends to see it.
The humor aspects.
Yeah, so, no, but there is a curious point about this. It is like highly technologized and internet and social media based religion.
No, and just one observation.
Yeah.
Bolsonaro election was a lot about the social media and about fake news. And there was this group that people say was paid by some ultra-right US guys. And they were doing amazing videos, ultra-right videos, but with good quality, well shot. And you go to the left-wing channels, they were so poorly made. So it was the Bolsonaro election was also about the visuals and what was online and about the Instagrams and YouTube and a lot of well-made videos that the left wing was not prepared at that point to do it. Now they are. Now they wake up a bit, in Brazil at least.
So, but in some sense, the evangelic church who defend traditions are more modern in their way of communicating than like the other sectors of society.
Yeah,
So
now
are they really traditional in the sense, in the negative sense as you feel it, or is it perhaps a right-winged avant-garde revolution?
Yeah, no, the tradition is more about being conservative. But I think the first evangelical church in Brazil, that's a big one, has a little bit more than 100 years. And this one I'm inspired by Medusa. It's started in the 70s. And there are other churches emerging every day because there is no pope, so anyone can open a church. But there are amazing churches. There are churches in the evangelical community that do LGBTQ marriage with transsexual priests and everything. But they're also this very ultra-right, and that they have now a mission to occupy places in the government. So they are electing a lot of people. So they're really studying how to communicate because they are trying to elect a lot of congressmen, a lot of mayors, presidents. So they are very focused on that.
Do you know this church called la Iglesia Universal del Reino de Dios? That's Brazilian, no? Pare de sufrir.
That's the one I was inspired in my movie. I don't like to say the name. But that was the one I was inspired, basically.
It's like a way of attracting the haters.
Like the slogan is "Stop Suffering."
It was not me.
The slogan is "Stop Suffering," no? Pare de sufrir.
No, there's a lot of logos, but
Pero uno es como "Pare de sufrir," no? Not like in Portuguese. I don't know. In Mexico, it's Portuguese priests on TV all the time. Sorry, Brazilian priests all the time.
Yeah, and in Mexico, in fact, there are also, like many of these Protestant movements, he even mingled their cult with the cult of Santa Muerte. I met a priest, one of these, and who does gay marriages, for example, also, and transvestite marriages in Tepito in Mexico City. But on the other hand, there is like this very strong reactionary Opus Dei linked right-wing church still present in Mexico. In your film, Joaquín, we see a vacation colony for youngsters from the upper class, which is directed by a group of priests that are, as a spectator would say, are from the Opus Dei. And I was wondering, seeing the film, because it looks very dystopic, what you see in the film, how much of this is really existent, or how to which point these structures really are real in Mexico today?
I mean, I think one important thing that is, Anita is talking about the church that talks to the majority of people, yeah, to the, I imagine, no, like middle class, people from the outside of the city. I don't know, like a church that has big.
Oh yeah, it's a church that is everywhere, and even inside the church, it can change from one branch, Rio de Janeiro. What the minister is saying sometimes completely different. What the minister is saying in the northeast area, so they had some freedom to move around depending where they are located.
Okay. So what I'm trying to say is that these movements, plus the Opus Dei and the Legionaries of Christ, that are more like, let's say, established Catholic, Roman Catholic movements, they were all born in the 20th century, and they are strongly linked with capitalism. You know, they're strongly linked with capital, with owning, with having. For some communities, it's about having something, and for some communities, like in my film, it's about having everything.
Yeah,
you know. So I think that it's similar, but it just has a different target and a similar way of talking about faith. Yeah.
Yeah, but there is a very peculiar point. I think like the Protestant evangelic churches are much about gaining power in society and also accumulating a lot of money. You can donate with your credit card during the services, but in the church, in the Catholic churches we see in our film, there's something very curious happening. Because it is anti-popular, it is against the people, it is for a rich elite. and the lecture of Christianism is completely against like what you can read in the evangelic. It's like if you have a religion of compassion, of pity, of brotherhood, you have the feeling that these priests indoctrinate the youngsters to be social Darwinists in order to defend the interests of their social class. How is that possible?
It's like a religious film where God is gone, you know.
Okay, yeah.
Or something like that, you know. And I feel like the difference between, I don't know, I haven't seen the other films, but I tried to make a film that talks about the upper class and their way they treat religion and the way they you know, use religion to control and to educate. And this is very rarely seen in Latin American cinema, because normally it's more about faith. It's about the tragedies of of poverty, the tragedies of being abandoned by your own government. And here is the opposite. You know, what happens when you have everything and when you even have the control of the faith, and what is the way that the children are educated. And at least in Mexico, I don't know in other countries, in Mexico, it's very clear that the upper class is mostly, or in many cases, educating kids in private Catholic schools. And these kids, they grow in a very particular way. There is even a phenomenon that started to happen a few years ago, is that the kids that are, the teenagers that are graduating from high school, they make their graduation video. And this graduation video, you know, that they play on the party, you can look for it online, you know. It's insane. They pay hundreds of, thousands of dollars to get like a full film production where they show in a very unfiltered way the power that they are now gonna have. So they show the watches they have, the drivers, the trips they do to the seaside, and always in a very patriarchal, male society. And this is the perspective I wanted to take on the film.
To perhaps talk a bit about Domingo and the Mist, Domingo y la Niebla, de Ariel. It is like exactly the opposite side you see in your film. These are the people who own the land and take it away from the people and oblige people to leave it. And here in your film, it is the vision of people who are obliged to leave their lands in order to make possible the construction of a highway. Well, that's something that happens in Germany, in Europe, and every kind of the world. But here it is a kind of gangster capitalism, who, of course, doesn't really voluntarily. It doesn't convince the people in a voluntary way, but threaten them. And so in some sense, traditional communities are going to disappear, or let's say villages, because of the interests of a kind of gangster capitalism. And the point is that in your film, why is it called Domingo in the Mist, is because there is a mist appearing, and the mist is the spirit of the wife of the protagonist, who comes back every night, and so he doesn't want to leave his cottage where he's living, because he has his connection with his wife. So this is not formally a religious person, but there's much of spiritual belief in this story, and in some sense this spiritual part makes him a rebel. Isn't it like this? So which is the role of spirituality in this context?
Well, yeah, like Costa Rica has this way of like not recognizing its own tradition and its own heritage before the colonization process. So Costa Rica is quite Catholic and lately very Christian and evangelic, but we have no, like Costa Rica doesn't admit its diversity. You know, it doesn't like fully commits to recognize its Afro culture or its indigenous culture, right? Nonetheless, there's all these like myths all around, you know, that are very spiritual and that are very Catholic inspired, but also take from, you know, indigenous heritage, originary heritage. And like everybody tells a story about a ghost. Everybody talks to a ghost in Costa Rica, right? Like everybody, you know, and in outside of San Jose and outside of the cities, people talk with everything. And, you know, and we have, as Costa Ricans, like we're used to live with our dads. Like there's like it's nothing, you know, it's not a big deal to have a relationship with your dead way after they're gone, right? So I wanted to play with that, and I wanted to like give Domingo this other reason, which is could be or could not be true, you know, and that plays with his alcoholism and plays with his regrets and with his toxic masculinity in a way in which makes him a rebel, but he's kind of like rebelling against these forces as a way of finding redemption, you know, from the ghost of these pasts. So
that could also be like
super
a delirium of alcoholism.
yeah. And it's like super religious and not at the same time. And I wanted to play with that in terms of like whenever I talk to somebody in the town where we made the film, they will be like, you know, like they thought it was a horror film first, or they thought it was a very religious film second, you know. And I think it's neither of those, no. And I do wanted to link that with gangster capitalism, as you say, because Costa Rica, just like everywhere in the world, is a place which is surrounded by gangster capitalism, but people don't tend to know it inside and outside of Costa Rica, and people don't tend to discuss it, right? So when I was like pitching developing the film, people will come to me, and I'm sorry, and I want to be very respectful with this, but like more than once people told me like, I would believe your film if it was in Colombia or in Mexico, but not in Costa Rica, you know? And that was important to me because, I mean, like, Costa Rica is not talking about its own violence and its own inequity, and the world doesn't know it either, right? And that's like doing the opposite of trying to change, you know? It's just trying to hide our mistakes and the things that set us like apart from each other and won't lead us to change. And that was like one of the things I wanted to do with this film.
In fact, it's a curious fact. There was a TV program on happiness, on a cultural program at ZDF German television, and they had a way of calculating the happiness index worldwide. And the highest rate of happiness index worldwide, number one, was Costa Rica.
Supposedly we are, and people keep telling that, yeah.
The image that we receive is that Costa Rica is the Switzerland of Central America and the globalization winner, because there is the tourism coming through globalization, there's ecotourism coming through globalization, there is high-tech chip industry that is developed, and at the same time it's one of the major exporters of bananas, so it is even a winner of the agricultural globalization. So how does this image go together with the story we get to know in your film?
I think like every project of tourism in Costa Rica hides an ugly truth, which is inequity, because these places are not developed equally, and the communities get to pay the worst part, you know. And there's communities that are left without water now. There are communities that are left without like dignifying jobs now, right? And no, the microchips are gone.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
No, it was like big in the early 2000s, but that company left many years ago. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, Costa Rica hides a lot of inequality. Costa Rica. Now that we're talking about religion, I don't know about your where you come from, your countries, but Costa Rica is a religious country by the Constitution. Like the Constitution, there's an article in the Constitution that defines Costa Rica as a Catholic country, you know, which is pretty not democratic, you know, to say one thing. So yeah, I believe like there's a lot of inequity, a lot of violence, a lot of wrongdoings of these like sort of winners of globalization, as you say, that I have this urgency of the world discussing it, of Costa Rica discussing it, and the world discussing it as well, because it's a myth, and myths become belong to religion, not to politics, right?
Yeah, true. And perhaps Alejandro, to talk about your film Utama, the indigenous community that is shown in your film, but also more generally talking about the Andean communities. One is shown like in a very deserted place in your film, and in fact, it is the only of these 4 films in which I don't see like this explicit presence of religion. And I was wondering, it's like the indigenous communities in the Andean countries were one of the first evangelized populations of the continent, and that became most fervently also Catholic at that time, although Catholicism was mingled with popular beliefs or with also Andean religions. I remember like these images from the 16th century when they have a cross, Jesus Christ on the cross, and over the cross it doesn't say Inri, but it says Inti, because Inti is the god of the sun in the Andean religions. But in any case, it is a formally extremely religious community. I think that in your film, people are struggling with completely other subjects, aren't they?
Yes, well, Bolivia is a very special country, as sure all of our countries are in Latin America, and we have many similitudes with other countries and some particular things. And when the Catholics came, it was a very aggressive conquer. It was an empire trying to sweep off the other religions and other people. So it was very aggressive. But in Bolivia, they had to be smart as well. Because they had to join, they didn't, the slaves they brought from Africa didn't survive to the altitude and to the work in the mine. Mm-hmm. So they decided to keep the Indians, to the indigenous people, to work in the mine as slaves. Potosí, right. So they had to join what they believed, because it was very strong beliefs, with Catholicism. So for instance, a good example is what you mentioned. Another good one is that they adored the mountain over there, El Cerro Rico de Potosí. So what they did with this image of the mountain, they joined it with Maria, the Virgin. So it was a virgin mountain. Mm-hmm. And the thing is that in South America, where the Inca Empire was, the Inca Empire did the same thing. So they erased all the other religions, and they took them their most treasured things and symbols to Cusco. So we already had one process like that with Inca culture, with the Inca Empire. And the thing is that now you can't really tell where something begins and the other one ends. Because of this mixture, and it is very strange and particular to study. I'm not an expert in theologism, but some of the things I see also evangelic movement is growing and growing and growing, and in a very fast way, and it reaches all of the communities. But the thing with evangelistic is that they are more fanatic and conservative, so they don't reach to everyone as Catholicism did. Catholicism did reach to everyone in Bolivia, a long work of transforming them, but they reach to every city and place in Bolivia, and every religion is now mixed. But I try to believe that evangelic are not being able to reach to everyone because they are so fanatic. But I did have some, when I was doing the casting for my film, it was shot in a very desertic place in Bolivia, so I didn't have many choices for many possibilities for the actors, and we traveled through the entire area, interviewing elderly people who wanted to be in the film. And there was a couple that were at first interested, and then when I told them the story and I said to them, you're gonna have to do a ritual, an indigenous ritual, they told me, no, we can't be involved because that's satanic and we are evangelistic, so it's not gonna happen.
Okay, wow.
But some of the rituals still are very strong, and I think also it's like a resistance to globalization. That's some of the subjects I wanted to explore in my film, is the resistance to globalization, because we all in Bolivia also are having this thing that cities are growing and growing and growing, and the countryside is being left with fewer and fewer people living in the countryside. And the thing with cities is that they all look alike, and they all end up looking alike. Once you see a city in Europe, you have seen, I wouldn't say them all because that would be disrespectful, but there are many things that are very look alike, and you find the same Starbucks and the same McDonald's and the same Adidas store, and it's becoming that way also in Latin America. We have, I think cities are starting to be more look alike than special by some very own things we used to have. And so I think it's not a bad thing. I mean, it's the way humanity is going, globalization. So we have to understand it, but we have to also try to understand and treasure what we had before this time.
Yeah, in your film, let's say the central persons, which are old indigenous couple living in a very deserted place, are in some sense, let's say, double victims of globalization. On the one side, through its effects, and on the other side through their own resistance against it, I believe, because like they don't have, these figures don't seem to have, for me, a religious belief which saves them from the unhappiness of the terrestrial world in some sense, but they are faced with very concrete problems. They have a flock of llamas and they don't find any water anymore because through global change water disappears. On the other hand, they have the big city closed. They have relatives who comes to take charge of them, and if they get sick, they don't want to be treated by a city doctor. So they have to suffer the negative consequences of globalization, and they refuse to take advantage of the advantages. Isn't that even more tragic?
I believe that's a sign of the main character. He's very stubborn, and with spoiler alert, he knows he's gonna die, but so he doesn't want to die in the hospital, in the city. He wants to die in his own law, in his home. And I believe also the thing with globalization and now with climate migration, the thing is we have to prepare ourselves as societies to nurture them, to support them, because it's going to happen. The thing with migration is that when you migrate, it's not because you don't like your home. It's because you are looking for better opportunities for a better life. And with migration, you're always going to stay a migrant. And even societies are going to try to put you in that place where you're a migrant, and you're probably not going to have the same opportunities. And that is also a problem with these old people. They can't migrate to the city easily and just find jobs or opportunities. And also with this historical migration we had inside Bolivia, it was always a problem where so the high society didn't want the migrants from the countryside to have opportunities, to have education. So I think that's also one thing we have to start preparing us in the world to face, because it's going to happen more and more and more. People are going to have to leave their homes because of climate change.
But on the other hand, there was this point you said you don't believe in, like, for example, evangelic missionaries to arrive to any kind of context. There is a point that is true, that both the evangelic religion you see in Anita's film and like the right-wing Catholic church in Joaquín's films are basically urban phenomena. So it's of course it is a vacancy, a colonie de vacances, a holiday colony in the countryside, but the people come from Mexico City to be there, and also the people in your religious sect in Medusa are not from a capital city, but a quite big town. In any case, it is a quite urban context. But I'm really wondering what happens if this context gets out of these urban contexts, if this belief gets out of the urban context, because I had a very weird experience 15 years ago in Brazil when I went to Amazonia, and I had to shoot something, a documentary, and there were also other like journalists around, and we had like this water airplane, which landed on the Amazonas. And then the pilot was as tall as I, as blonde as I, and his name was Marcio Rempel, which is a funny name for German because it's like push violently, Rempel. And he was a German descendant, Brazilian from Rio Grande do Sul, from the opposite part of the country. And I tried to find out why he was flying around journalists with a water airplane through the Amazonas, until I found out that this was only to earn a bit of money, because in fact his real job was to be a pastor. And he used this plane to contact the last indigenous tribes who have not been in touch with civilization, to bring them the Bible. And just 15 years later, today, I looked him up on the internet and I found him on LinkedIn, and he's still missionary pilot, pastor, researcher, and director of Missão do Céu, Mission of Heaven. So for 15 years, he has been contacting tribes in the Amazonas to bring the evangelic religion. I don't know, what is your vision about this? To what is going this? Because I think they're really convinced people who are going to continue.
For me, at least he's a true believer. He has another job to go, because I think the thing about the urban phenomenon is about the money that's involved in the churches. People has to pay 10% or even more. And in some evangelical churches, the big one in Brazil, the moment that the people in the cult donate money, it's not like in the Catholic that something went by and put the money. No, you go to the front of the stage, it's announced how much you are donating. And the most you donate, more respect you are. There is a woman that processed that at the church and win, because she was in a cult that the minister started to ask for more things, and she was there in the cathartical things, and then she donated her refrigerator, her air conditioning, her car, everything she owned. And then she arrived at home. The next day, they're going to pick up, and her husband like, "Fuck, what did you do?" And they cook, and then the family prosecuted, and they were able to, like 2 years later, to get some money indemnization. But that happens. There was another big cult that was famous because the minister asked for people to donate their cars and to go walking by foot by home. So for me, this pilot's more like a true believer. And it's more like an exception nowadays of what's happening. I think the big enemies of the indigenous communities in Brazil that are still in isolation are not them, but especially, how to say, the guys that are trying to extract minerals from Amazonia, the guys that are polluting the river. There are some tribes that everybody's dying because of the pollution that's arriving there, or being killed by people that want to explore their area economic. So now in Brazil, there are a lot of, it's something that's a lot in the news about some tribes that disappear from day to night because they were decimated by sometimes they poison the river and the land, so the all tribe dies, the people that want to explore the area, and things that terrible like that. And with Bolsonaro, of course, the rules change, so everything's more loose. Yeah.
But aren't like religious conservatism and neoliberal expansion in some sense go together in a very unholy alliance too?
I mean, going back to the case of this pilot, I agree with you. If the pilot just really likes the Bible and that's the way he connects with something
He has
spiritual.
he has a big association who finances it.
Okay. I mean, if that association is actually entangled with the bad part of it, then of course it's not good. But if it's just a guy that likes the Bible, then I guess that's right.
And the Jesuits are doing that for centuries. In Brazil, the Jesuits went there to convert the native Brazilians, and they went to Africa. They went to a lot of places, and they stick there. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if I like a book, whatever book, and I go to all the villages to say that I love this book, there's nothing bad about it, I guess.
Yeah.
But if there's some story behind that book to take advantage of people through their faith, then I guess that's a problem. No, I guess in all our movies, when it goes beyond the book or beyond the faith or beyond something.
Yeah, the thing with religion is it should end with yourself. If you like it, if you love it, it's okay, it's you. But when you start to make others try to believe in the same way that you, and you're starting to be invasive and aggressive, and you start trying to decide for them, that's when it gets rotten, I think.
Well, you want to say?
Yeah, maybe. Like, especially when it goes into politics, right? Especially when it goes to the Congress, because that's, I think, modernity and I'm sorry, democracy has tried to keep the two things separate for a reason. And the reason is the way these institutions are constructed and the way, like, the democratic process goes through them. So when religion comes to Congress, I believe there's always going to be a problem there. And the problem is that, as an example, in Costa Rica has been bi-party system. That's how it says. Like two-party system, right? For forever, until like 10 years ago, there was an election in 2014 where the two-party system was broken, and actually the two parties that went into the second round were two new parties. One was like center-right, and the other was evangelic, right? And evangelism like grew in politics that so much because it went from like we have like 57 like congressmen in Congress, right? They went from 2 to 14 in one election because the two-party system was forgetting about the coasts, right? The Pacific and the Caribbean, and that's where through church the evangelic parties, you know, like mingled the church with the party and like got their power by being where you know, social democrat or neoliberal parties weren't, you know, at. So that is, in my opinion, like a dynamic of like a very strange dynamic of getting to power, right? So I do believe these two things should be apart. They shouldn't be together. Coming from a country that is, like, I repeat because I want this to be known all over the world, that my country like calls itself a religious country in its constitution, right?
Well, I think it would be too late to start a new discussion point, but I think it's a very good moment to use the last 5 to 10 minutes we have for questions from the audience. So please, if you want to contribute an observation or to ask questions to the directors, it's your turn now.
I'm interested in if there are any indigenous filmmakers as well
in Latin America.
In Brazil, there are.
There are?
Yeah, but there was a movement, especially like in the beginning of the 2000s when like Lula was elected the first time, and there was a movement to people to go to the indigenous communities and teach them how to use the camera, but let them do the films, not.
They are doing film. They're telling their stories. I saw a young girl an activist who is very, very on Instagram and these things, una indígena de Brazil, and she's very professional doing films, but just for these it was for the activism of not doing fiction films.
Yeah, now with cell phones it's much more easy, and there is much levels of indigenous tribes. There are some that are that people that speaks Portuguese that went to mixed entry schools with people that are not from the indigenous community, and there are others in groups that are much more isolated. So, but there are these movements, especially in the beginning of 2000, to go to the tribes. But now in Brazil, like there's no more funding, there's nothing less. So let's wait for the elections. But now it's complicated in Brazil for everyone. So people that are doing things more like with cell phones or very cheap cameras. But also the indigenous community in Brazil is smaller than in other countries in Latin America. So I think that in Brazil, what mostly happened, a lot of people, they were killed, and others committed suicide when they are turned into slaves. So the native Brazilians, they were mostly decimated. So what didn't happen with not so much in the Spanish-speaking countries, so I think they can answer better than me.
Does anyone of you know Henry Vallejo from Peru? You know?
Not personally.
Okay, but he would be a case like this.
Of indigenous filmmakers.
Yeah, he was here in at Filmfest München in 2006, and he makes Andean film cinema, and it's called the Cinema Andino, and they do this without any funding, and he does this. He did that at that time with like analogic video cameras. It's like it was kind of commercial cinema based on also mystic popular beliefs. I think the film he had here was El Secreto de la Cariziri or something like this, the secret of the Cariziri. And he he does tours with at that time with like I think a VHS recorder and a projector, and he goes to the old cinemas that don't exist anymore because like the 35 projectors are out, and they're basically now used as evangelic churches. And he goes there and installs his own projectors, and then he charges entrance fees, and that made him. I remember when he arrived here, our guest manager gave him per diem to get food because he didn't have a credit card. But then he talked me about that he, in fact, wanted to get an HD cam camera, and which at that time was extremely expensive. We're talking about 2006, you know. So that he was going to professionalize this. And now I met Javier Rebollo, the filmmaker from Spain, who told me that he met Henry Vallejo, that he continued. So this is like a career that has been on for two decades already. But perhaps you know some.
Well, in Mexico, the government, the new government, because Mexico changed from right wing to left wing 4 years ago, and they opened a film school in San Cristobal de las Casas. That is one of the centers of like the indigenous Mexico, and there's a film school run by the government, and there has been many films spoken not in Spanish, in other languages. The latest one is called Nudo Mixteco, and it's quite it went really well with that film, and there is something, but of course there's like a challenge to achieve the technical, you know, let's say level to compete with the other films. But I think it's a matter of education and of time, and the stories sometimes, in my opinion, they come from, you know, they're still not very unique. They're still kind of like just like they're told from the inside, but they're still not. There's still a lot of way into developing those stories and exploring the human condition through that, more than portraying just like a external portrait of what it means to be a part of that community.
Actually, the school I studied in Cuba is really preoccupied with, you know, the matter of diversity. So like through the years since I was a student and now that I come back as a professor, I have seen many students that identify themselves as indigenous, that still live in their communities, from Panama, from Colombia, from Venezuela. You know, they're telling their own stories and go back to their communities. You know, like Orgun Wawa, who works in the Gunayala community in Panama, but also lives in Panama City, you know, and he's a struggling filmmaker coming from a region that doesn't make a lot of films, which is Central America. And like this year, just recently in the last graduation, a student from Brazil who comes from an indigenous community just graduated as a director and made a very powerful thesis film that will probably check around in festivals later in the year. But yeah, I mean, like that place, that school in Cuba has always like worried with that subject, you know, and we'll see how the career of these brilliant students will go.
Well, in the case of Bolivia, as they already mentioned, it's a slow process and you have to invest a lot in it. It's a matter of money, and Bolivia is a very poor country, a very poor state. So there's people that has no education yet, or no opportunities to have education. So cinema is also about opportunities, about education, about money. So it's a long process, and there has been many schools that have been concerned about that. Many good programs since the 70s, traveling all around the country, teaching them how to use a camera, how to do cinema. But sometimes it's just not appealing also for them. It's just a different culture. It's something for the countryside. It's something that happens in the cities. And yes, for instance, the relationship with cinema is very different. For my actors, they are 75 and 74. And she went for the first time in her life to a cinema when she saw her own film. It was her first time going to a cinema. So it's just a different relation, and I believe it's a matter of opportunities and of time and politics, and our politicians sadly in Latin America are concerned in winning elections and in staying in power or whatever other thing, or religion or whatever thing, but they are not truly interested in at least in Bolivia, truly interested in people.
Is there any last quick questions? Yeah, please, because sorry. We have to be quite brief because
last, okay, quick, I'm not sure. One one issue I would be quite interested. In Germany, we had a lot of influx from people coming, you know, everybody many years ago from Afghanistan, Syria, and so on. And all of you, you're from Latin America, you always were very welcoming European people who flew after Second World War to Latin America. But how you as filmmakers see right now what is going on that inside Latin America, that let's say Venezuelan people go down even to Brazil. In my holidays, I wondered how many Venezuelans now even come to Rio. And then people from Central America, they go many thousands to Mexico. So 20 years ago, when I went to Mexico, there have been Mexicans there. How do you see that as filmmakers with your eyes, what's happening there right now? Because there was changing societies for Latin America.
No, in the case of Venezuela, they are crossing the border to the Amazonic area. They are super far away from Rio. Like the closest airport is Manaus, that is 6 hours from airplane, for example, to Rio. That's in the middle of Brazil. So the question is much more in the Amazonic area, but Bolsonaro tried a lot to close the border. A lot of people are asking to close this border so people don't come more from Venezuela. But it's mostly more a question for Amazonia. You don't see Venezuelans in other states in Brazil. But I think if Lula is elected, things will change. I think we'll have some way to try to give some support and comeback programs like the Mais Médicos from Cuba and other things that were super nice that were happening in Brazil. But now everything's about the election in October.
Yeah, in Central America has always been like since the 70s with the civil wars in all of the countries, like migration has been really, really high, with the exception of Costa Rica and Panama, you know, which didn't have a civil war in the 70s. The thing is that like the population is, especially on the north of Central America, which is Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, they migrate a lot to Mexico, but mostly to the United States. And there's a migrant flux in Central America right now, actually, because like the migrant route, like from Haiti, comes and passes through Central America until Mexico, and it used to be able to pass to the United States, but now after Trump, like that's where it like ends and then goes down again. And Costa Rica has a big immigrant flux from Venezuela and Colombia, as well as Nicaragua too, which are two very different type of migrations, because one is political and the other one is economical. And there's this sense of, well, Panama as well has a big migrant flux coming from Colombia and Panama. And yeah, I think the area of Central America has always had, I mean, always since I've been alive, right? Had a big, like migration is one of the words you learn when you're a kid, kind of.
Thank you.
Something you want to add? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just because Mexico is the end of the road for, as you say, for a lot of people. And after Trump in the presidency of the States, many things changed, and it became like a solid wall where many people had to wait for months in the border, and some of them decided to come back or to stay in Mexico. And Mexico has its own problems of violence and of the cartels, and it actually, the immigrants, they come and they think that once they reach Mexico they have already found like peace, but they don't know that is the biggest nightmare is just awaiting them. So it's a big social tragedy happening, in the lower class, in the immigrant sphere, and in this world. In the other hand, many filmmakers, many artists, many people with education, with preparation, with university, they are coming to Mexico, and slowly they're impregnating Mexican cinema as well. So one example is your producer, Julio Hernandez, that is from Guatemala. In the case of my film, the art director, he's from Chile, the sound designer from Argentina, you know, and a lot of talent, I don't know if all, but a lot of talent wants to come to Mexico to work, because filmmakers will always look for the healthy place to make movies. It doesn't matter. And this is the history of cinema. So it's a two-sided thing. In one side it's very bad. On the other side, there's a lot of communication between countries. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I myself live in Mexico now. I
Okay.
myself migrated to Mexico.
Well, just very shortly, very quickly, in the case of Bolivia, we have been historically a country of migrants, because we migrate a lot to Brazil, to Argentina, to Chile, but we also migrate in Bolivia. So, for instance, the biggest city now in Bolivia is called Santa Cruz, and it has 3 million people. And in the 50s, they were only 50,000 people. So a lot of people is going to Santa Cruz, and the migration can be also very difficult inside Bolivia, because you have many different cultures. You're coming from the Andes to a tropical city, or from the valley. So I like to believe that we are a country that migrates a lot, that has a lot of movement in that way. And just to add, the last thing with migration is that migration is a two-way, a two-sense way, and many times we forget about that. Many times during the wars, a lot of Europeans were flying away from Europe to South America, and now it's the opposite way. Many South Americans are flying away from South America and Central America and to the north. So it's a both street way, and we shouldn't forget that in the entire world.
That was a good way to finish. Thank you, Alejandro. It started to rain. The best thing I think you could do is to simply stay here and continue at 8 o'clock with Utama by Alejandro, so you can see concretely the things he had just talked about. I thank you a lot for being here, and also for the patience. We waited a little bit in the beginning, and now we were a little bit too long, but I hope you enjoyed it anyhow. And first of all, and thanks to all the filmmakers to coming from these regions, from Latin America all the way to Munich.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.